You are listening to a free version of the Majority Report with Sam Steeder. To support this show and get another 15 minutes of daily program, go to majority.fm, please.
The Majority Report with Sam Steeder.
It is Thursday, January 14th, 2021. My name is Sam Steeder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, writing in Dissent magazine, Vanessa Williamson, and the austerity politics of white supremacy. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, officially the first president ever to be impeached twice, and this time with a handful of Republican votes. The FBI is warning of right-wing threats across the country, particularly over the next week. Capitol Police officers say they wouldn't be surprised if Republican members of Congress helped plan the attack on the Capitol building. With daily COVID deaths hovering around 4,000 people, the CDC forecast says more than 90,000 people could die in the next 3 weeks. Joe Biden expected to call for expanded COVID tax credit. Meanwhile, senators are pushing for baby bonds. New jobless claims at nearly 1 million. That is 300,000 worse than the worst week of the Great Recession. Meanwhile, Senator Wyden calls for extended unemployment expansion tied to the unemployment rate. The former governor of Michigan charged only with 2 misdemeanors in the Flint poisoning of tens of thousands of people. All this and more on today's program. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. Forgive me, we had a little technical snafu at the beginning of the program. Joining me, as always, Emma Vigeland. Emma, how are you?
I'm well. The news about former Governor Snyder seems to be, I don't want to say there's something in the water, because obviously there's so much baggage there, but powerful people being held accountable, that's a good thing. But then on the flip side, much like Trump, it's probably just going to be some sort of slap on the wrist.
There was, and people are digging into this, there were more significant charges that were in the works before this new administration in Michigan came in, and I suspect this is going to remain controversial. Tens of thousands of people were poisoned. You have many, many kids now with learning issues because as small children, they were fed water with lead. And there is a lot of reason to believe that the governor had at least a reasonable expectation of knowing this was going on. I don't think this is the last we will hear of the charges that have been brought against him. That said, charges yesterday in the House of Representatives, Donald Trump impeached for the second time. There were 10 Republicans, I believe it was, who joined the Democrats. 4 Republicans abstained. So there was at least a little bit of embarrassment by Republicans. Mitch McConnell seems to have come out more publicly saying that he believes that impeachment's the right thing. It's unclear whether he will go along with Chuck Schumer's desire to have a trial in the coming days. to get it out of the way, hopefully, and dispense with it before Joe Biden becomes president. But it's also quite clear, according to Chuck Schumer and others, that the Senate can go about other business simultaneously while holding a trial. So you can trials in the afternoon, and the other Senate business that needs to take place will happen in the morning. It's really a calculation at this point by Mitch McConnell as to whether Republicans will be punished severely by their own voters who they have groomed to see Donald Trump as their savior. And so I guess...
and the polling shows that Trump still has massive popularity and is the polling favorite within the Republican Party in 2024 now. If McConnell wants to go further and actually completely remove Trump from the party and try to rip out the cancer that is Donald Trump, or how he sees it in the Republican Party, they could hold a Senate trial, they could convict, and then Trump could be, because the Senate would determine the rules, barred from running again. That's the Machiavellian way to go about this, and you can't put that kind of maneuvering past Mitch McConnell.
And it's not just a question of whether people think that Donald Trump is going to run again, as much as there's a threat that he might run again, right? I mean, it's conceivable that Donald Trump will be in good enough health 4 years from now to run again. But what is, I think, almost obvious is that at the very least, he could spend the next 2 years making it look like he was going to run, 3 years, and essentially anoint himself the kingmaker for the Republican Party. If there's no threat whatsoever that he can run for the Republicans, then people can largely, or at least in part, ignore him.
And that's made easier without his social media platforms, which we can't underestimate. That's how he galvanized so much of this support, was based on his prominence and the way he spoke directly to people on his social media, typos and all. People were charmed by it. He doesn't have that at his disposal anymore.
That's true. I also think, though, they must have a ton of emails because we have signed up for some of those. And I'll tell you something. I've never seen a barrage of emails. In the meantime, here is the other issue involving the attack on the Capitol is not just Donald Trump's role in it. The other issue is becoming increasingly the role of, or the potential role of, certain lawmakers in the Republican Party who may have, a story from BuzzFeed that there are Capitol police officers who would not be surprised if these attackers had been helped by Republican lawmakers because of the information they had about the Capitol. Ayanna Pressley's office says that their panic button was ripped out. Unclear why. We have at least one Democratic representative who alleged that there were members of Congress who were essentially taking people around on reconnaissance tours the day before the attack. Here is newly elected Cori Bush, representative from Missouri's 1st District.
Sean Hannity will learn her name now.
I think, and at the very least, yes, I think he will pay more attention.
They better.
And says that the House should impeach Trump, and why.
Madam Speaker, St. Louis and I rise in support of the article of impeachment against Donald J. Trump. If we fail to remove a white supremacist president who incited a white supremacist insurrection, it's communities like Missouri's 1st District that suffer the most. The 117th Congress must understand that we have a mandate to legislate in defense of Black lives. The first step in that process is to root out white supremacy, starting with impeaching the white supremacist in chief. Thank you, and I yield back.
And from New York wishes to reserve the gentlewoman.
You can hear the Republican voices booing in there. Here, following Cori Bush, Glenn Grothman, congressman from Wisconsin's 6th District, gets up and tries, I guess, to refute the premise. I mean, the interesting thing is that, of course, we've heard quite a bit that supposedly part of the reasons why Democrats underperformed, supposedly, was because of the push for Black Lives Matter and activism that took place over the summer. I think that's been largely disproven by the data. But what is, I think, not controversial was that this was a big theme. So to the extent that folks like Cori Bush have a mandate, it certainly is to protect.
Especially given the district she represents. I mean, she's doing what a congressperson is supposed to do, representing her constituents.
Indeed. So here is Glenn Groffman, and this is, I guess, his attempt to refute the premise of Cori Bush's speech.
I rise today to strongly object to the articles of impeachment proposed against President Trump, which make the preposterous claim that President Trump wanted or expected the riots that took place last week. He clearly said he wanted peaceful and patriotic demonstration. He did say he wanted people to fight like hell or we're not going to have a country anymore, but that's obviously standard hyperbole and was not meant to aim at physical fights. But what is offensive is what you are saying and inflammatory about the tens of thousands of peaceful protesters who were there last week, as well as the tens of millions of people they represent. You don't understand why they were here. They're scared to death we're going to go back to the days without Donald Trump of hundreds of thousands of people crossing this border every month. They're scared to death nobody's going to keep our manufacturing here. They're scared to death that nobody else will fight the cancel culture as we head towards an era when some things can't be said. They're scared to death that a majority party got here by teaming up with Black Lives Matter, a bunch of founded by Marxists and that dislike the family.
The gentleman's time's expired.
Oh,
I'm not sure that's a refutation of her point. Yes, we know that the Republican Party is deathly afraid of immigrants crossing the border. In fact, Sean Hannity, in the days following the attack on the Capitol, was hyping the latest caravan that supposedly is coming to the United States. You remember
good time to deflect.
The last caravan that was headed to this country in the run-up, I think it was, to the 2018 midterm elections, where you had reports of Republican voters in the state of Minnesota concerned that their lake houses would be overrun by this caravan that supposedly was heading to the border. Now, of course, you can go back and look at the news reports of the caravan the day after the election, and somehow it just sort of melted away.
The number one issue when I spoke to Trump supporters in Florida, when I was on that beat, the caravan that was basically doing an informal poll. And then, of course, nothing materialized. But this is how they changed the conversation. And the idea that this is economic anxiety that drove these people. I mean, you had business owners, you had a CEO, you had state representatives, you had an Olympic gold medal winner, all of these people that stormed the Capitol. This was not about money. And I know that's an easier conversation to have and something that progressives like to focus on. But this was about white supremacy. This was involving white supremacists. This was an attack that is rooted in racial resentment, and ignoring that and pretending like it's different, it does a disservice to what we saw and doesn't get to the root of the problem. I know he's not a progressive.
Groffman is making the argument there. I mean, the fact that there is this anxiety of immigrants coming from Mexico, not from anywhere else, incidentally.
Of course.
The fact that when you talk about our trade deficit, this is what Donald Trump ran on. The trade deficit is worse now than it was when Donald Trump came into office. If they're that much concerned about, where American jobs are, we just had the worst week of jobless claims in maybe decades, and on top of which, the idea that the Democrats have teamed up with Black Lives Matter as if this is they
rebuke them aggressively, as opposed to like a handful of people like Cori Bush, Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, etc.
It's not even a question of whether the Democrats rebuke them or don't rebuke them. The idea that the fear of a movement so that Black lives are valued in the same fashion as white lives would be a terrible